काइनेमेटिक्स। तो लास्ट क्लास में हम लोगों ने स्पीड, डिस्टेंस, डिस्प्लेसमेंट, वेलोसिटी, एक्सीलरेशन ये सब बेसिक कर लिया था। एंड वी आर डिस्कसिंग के इंस्टेंटेनियस स्पीड क्या है और एवरेज स्पीड क्या है। सो व्हेन आई से दैट distance traveled between time t1 and t2, है ना? So between from time t1 to t2, whatever distance you travel, if you divide this distance by t2 minus t1, then this is average speed. Okay, so even if t2 is t1 plus delta t, then this is x upon delta t. This is again average speed for the time interval delta t until as you are able to substitute delta t equal to 0. Okay, so if this is a small distance delta x in the small time delta t, this is itself is average speed. This itself is average speed. But in calculus, if we say delta x by delta t, limit delta t tends to 0, what we get is dx by dt. Then this is known as instantaneous speed. Instantaneous speed. Okay. So how does this work? Suppose हमारे को डिस्टेंस ट्रेवल वर्सेस टाइम का ग्राफ दे रखा है। डिस्टेंस ट्रेवल वर्सेस टाइम का ग्राफ दे रखा है। सो दिस इज योर डिस्टेंस ट्रेवल वर्सेस टाइम ग्राफ। डिस्टेंस वर्सेस टाइम ग्राफ। सो एट टाइम t1 the distance you have traveled is s1, and at time t2 the distance you have traveled is s2. Then if I join this line, and if I draw this line, then the total distance you have traveled is s2 minus s1, this one point, and the total time you have taken is t2 minus t1, this one. Then your average speed is s2 minus s1 upon t2 minus t1, which is delta s by delta t. If you try to bring this point 2 closer to here, closer and closer, at one point what happens is, when this delta t is tending to 0 and this line becomes a tangent, then in the limit delta s, in the limit when delta t tends to 0, delta s by delta t. What is delta s by delta t? Delta s is this, for this triangle, this is opposite side and this is adjacent side. So basically this is tan theta. Basically this is tan theta, that is the slope of the line. So to find the slope of the line, we actually need 2 points, s1 t1 and s2 t2. This is point 1 and this is point 2. But when your point 2 is coming closer to 1, closer to 1, closer to 1, and when you reach here, what you do is, at this point s1 t1, we are able to find the tangent. Now at this point we are having the tangent at this point. Now T2 is actually has approached T1. T2 has approached T1. And in the limit, when T2 tends to T1 and this line becomes tangent to this curve at the point S1 T1. Now the slope of this line, because till this point when T2 was different from T1, it was average. It was average. But when this becomes tangent, now T2 is actually equal to T1. When you are approaching mathematically, when you reach this tangent, this T2 becomes equal to T1. Okay? ये tangent बन जाता है इस line को. Then the slope of this line, if you are able to find the slope of this line, then the slope of this line becomes the instantaneous speed. Instantaneous speed. Okay? समझ में आ गया instantaneous speed कैसे निकलेगी अपनी? Distance versus time ग्राफ में जिस पॉइंट पे इंस्टेंटेनियस स्पीड निकालनी है, उस पॉइंट पे जो टेंजेंट का जो स्लोप होगा वो उसकी इंस्टेंटेनियस स्पीड देगा. तो अगर अपन एल्जेब्रिकल करने की कोशिश करेंगे तो हम लोग डेल्टा टी को छोटा कर सकते हैं, डेल्टा टी को जीरो नहीं कर सकते एल्जेब्रिकल. बट जब हम कैलकुलस में जाएंगे और जब हम डेल्टा टी को जीरो कर लेंगे, जो कि यहाँ पे एल्जेब्रा में तो नहीं कर सकते, लेकिन यहाँ पे इस ग्राफ पे हमने क्या कर दिया, जो लाइन जिसका स्लोप हमारे को एवरेज स्पीड दे रहा था, उस लाइन को इस कर्व का टेंजेंट कर दिया, देन वी आर एबल टू गेट द इंस्टेंटेनियस स्पीड. आ गया समझ में?
यस सर.
इसको उतार लो, इस ग्राफ को बना लो, अच्छे से समझ लो इसको.
सर उतार लिया.
बाकी जनों को उतारने देना.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. Similarly, if I draw the displacements versus time graph, so displacement time graph may we also get the direction. Then, if with the instantaneous speed, if I add the direction, अब direction add करना, then that will become my instantaneous velocity. Okay. So, average speed is total distance upon total time and average velocity is total displacement upon total time. Okay. So now solve this question. A particle travels half the distance with speed v1 and rest of half the distance with speed v2. Okay. Find average speed. Okay. हाफ जो टोटल डिस्टेंस ने ट्रेवल किया ना, उसमें आधा डिस्टेंस तो v1 से ट्रेवल किया और आधा डिस्टेंस v2 से ट्रेवल किया. You have to find out the average speed. Find out the average speed. So average speed का फॉर्मूला क्या है? टोटल डिस्टेंस अपॉन टोटल टाइम. So can you find out the average speed?
Sir, 2 v1 v2 upon.
Yes, sir.
Sanvi,
Yes, sir.
done? Sanvi, done क्या?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let's say the total distance is s. If you have done it, you should know that you have to do it like this. If the total distance is s and the total time is t, then average speed is given by total distance upon total time. Now it says half the distance, that is s by 2 distance and s by 2 distance. Now half the distance with speed v1 and half the distance with speed v2. So what is the time t1? And t1 is equal to s by 2 v1 and t2 is equal to s by 2 v2. So this average speed is s is, what is total time t? Total time t is equal to t1 plus t2. So this is equal to s by 2 v1 plus s by 2 v2. V is equal to, that is average speed. Or I can say s by 2 v1 plus s by 2 v2 is equal to s by v, or 2 by v is equal to 1 upon v1 plus 1 upon v2. I'll prefer this result. And we say that this is v is harmonic mean of v1 and v2. So now remember this result. When particles travels half the distance, then the average speed is basically harmonic mean. The average speed is basically harmonic mean. Okay. Now next. A particle travels half the time with speed v1 and another half the time with speed v2. Okay. Then find the average speed. Do it. Do it. You don't know. You don't have to assume that you have the answer. Okay. You solve it.
Sir, V1 plus V2 upon 2.
Sohel, Sanvi.
Yes, sir.
Yes sir.
Yes, sir.
मतलब हो गया.
Yes, sir, हो गया. सर पहले माइक काम नहीं कर रहा था.
Okay. Sanvi हो गया.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the total distance is s and the total time is t. Now it says half the time. So I don't know what is in what distance it travels in half the time. So in half the time it travels distance s1. Another half the times it travels distance s2 with speed v1 and with speed v2. Okay. So s1 is v1 into t by 2 and s2 is v2 into t by 2. And average speed is what? Total distance upon total time. And total distance is s1 plus s2 upon total time, which is v1 into t by 2 plus v2 into t by 2 by t, which is v1 plus v2 by 2. So I have two results here. If the particle is traveling equal distance in equal interval of times, remember, I am now generalizing my result. If it is traveling equal distances, okay, equal distances with different speeds, then average speed is basically a harmonic mean. And if it travels for equal time intervals, with different speed, then average speed is arithmetic mean. समझ में आ गया? इक्वल डिस्टेंस ट्रेवल करा डिफरेंट स्पीड से तो एवरेज स्पीड हार्मोनिक मीन होगी, और अगर इक्वल टाइम इंटरवल्स में डिफरेंट स्पीड से ट्रेवल करा है तो एवरेज स्पीड अरिथमेटिक मीन होगी. ओके, so now question is a particle travels half the distance with speed v1, for remaining half it travels for half the time with speed v2, and next half the time with speed v3. आ रहा है समझ? टोटल डिस्टेंस जो भी उसने ट्रेवल किया उसमें फर्स्ट हाफ डिस्टेंस उसने v1 से ट्रेवल किया है, और नेक्स्ट हाफ डिस्टेंस जो है ना, उस नेक्स्ट हाफ डिस्टेंस में आधे टाइम तो वो v2 से चला और आधे टाइम वो v3 से चला. फाइंड आउट द एवरेज स्पीड.
Yes, sir, done.
Okay, tell me the answer.
Sir, 2v1 v2 plus 2v1 v3 divided by 2v1 plus v2 plus v3.
Yes, sir. Same. Yeah.
Okay. Tanvi. Okay, so what we are going to do is we will not go with the basics. We'll use the previous two results which you have derived. So it travels half the distance, s by 2 with v1, and another half the distance, let's say another half of the distance is travels with v1 dash. Okay, with the average speed of v1 dash. In the next half, what happens is it travels half the time with v2 and half the time with v3. So the average speed for this distance over the half the time is actually arithmetic mean. So we can say v1 dash is v2 plus v3 by 2. Okay. Now it is traveling half the distance with the speed v1 and half the distance with average speed v2 plus v3 by 2. Okay. Because in this half the distance, it was traveling for half the time with v2 and half the time with v3. And when it's half the time now, then what we say is that the average is arithmetic mean, right? Average speed is arithmetic mean. So now, when it's half the distance, then the average speed is harmonic mean. So 2 by v is equal to 1 by v1 plus 2 by v2 plus v3. So this will be 2 by V is equal to V2 plus V3 plus twice V1 upon V1 multiplied by V2 plus V3. So V is equal to twice V1, V2 plus V3 divided by twice V1 plus V2 plus V3. Okay, so I'm also getting the same answer. Copy this. क्लियर हो गया सबको?
Yes, sir.
आगे चलते हैं. Okay. Question है, a particle travels 1/3 of the distance with speed v1. Okay, 1/3 of the distance with the speed v1. The remaining distance half the time it travels with speed v2 and next half the time it travels with the speed v3. Okay, find out the average speed. Find out the average speed. नहीं हुआ?
Sir, 3
सर हो गया.
V naught V1 plus V2 upon V1 plus V2 4 V naught.
क्या क्या वापस बोल. एक सेकंड. हाँ बोल.
3 V नॉट V1 plus V2 ब्रैकेट में
V नोट का है?
सॉरी 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 3 V नहीं एक सेकंड सर
नहीं हुआ बाकी सबसे?
सर हो गया
क्या है?
सर 3v1v2 plus 3v1v3 divided by 4v1 plus v2 plus v3.
ओके, यही आ रहा है क्या तेरा भी?
हाँ सर वो V नॉट V1 थोड़ा कंफ्यूजन हो गया था
तो जल्दबाजी मत कर, एग्जाम में मर जाएगा. ओके, so let's say the total distance is s. Then s by 3 is travel with the speed v1 and 2s by 3 for half the time with v2 and half the time with v3. And when it's travel a half the time, then the average is v2 plus v3 by 2, arithmetic mean. So this distance is travel with the velocity v2 plus v3 by 2. Now what to do? Now see, what I have given is, what I said was, when it travels equal distances with different speeds, average speed is harmonic mean. The condition here is equal distances. So what I will do is, I will divide the entire journey into equal distances. So what I will do is, I will divide the entire journey like this. S by 3, S by 3, S by 3. And this is with the speed V1. This is V2 plus V3 by 2. And this is V2 plus V3 by 2. Now when it travels equal distance with different speeds, then the average speed is harmonic mean. So 3 by V is 1 upon V1 plus 2 upon V2 plus V3 plus 2 upon V2 plus V3. So 3 upon V is 1 upon V1 plus 4 upon V2 plus V3. So if I simplify this, I think you are right. I'll get the same answer. V is equal to 3V1 multiplied by V2 plus V3 divided by V2 plus V3 plus 4V1. Yes. So this is the answer. Okay. Chale again.
यस
See now, if you
Yes,
remember
sir.
these two starting results, that for equal distance in equal interval of time, the average speed is harmonic mean. No, if it travels equal distances, then with different speeds, then the average is harmonic mean. And if it travels in equal interval of time with different speeds or whatever speeds, not necessarily different, huh? But with speeds v1, v2, v3, then the average is arithmetic mean. Okay. So last question we'll do. A particle travels for one third of the time with speed v1, and for the remaining time, it travels for remaining time. It travels half the distance with speed v2 and half the distance with speed v3. Find out the average speed.
Sir, 3v1 v2 v3
एक मिनट एक मिनट एक
upon
मिनट एक मिनट एक मिनट वापस बोल.
3v1 v2 v3
हम्म
upon v1 v2
हम्म
plus v2 v3
हम्म
plus v3 v1.
ओके. और किसी का है आंसर?
यस सर.
यही है क्या?
नो सर, सर मेरा अलग है.
तेरा बोल दे क्या है.
सर v1 v2 प्लस v1 v3 प्लस 4v2 v3 डिवाइडेड बाय 3v2 प्लस 3v3.
ओहो, दोनों का बहुत जमीन आसमान का फर्क है. डायमेंशनली तो दोनों सही हो. डायमेंशनली तो दोनों सही हो. तो अब दोनों में से किसने गलती की है पता चल जाएगा. लेट्स से द टोटल डिस्टेंस इज एस. ठीक है. उसमें 1/3 ऑफ द टाइम एंड 2/3 ऑफ द टाइम यहाँ पे स्पीड v1 है. और यहाँ पे क्या, हाफ द डिस्टेंस इज v2 एंड हाफ द डिस्टेंस इज v3. तो हाफ द डिस्टेंस है तो जो एवरेज स्पीड हो जाएगी ट्वाइस v2 v3 अपॉन v2 plus v3. Okay. Now I divide it into three equal intervals, t by 3 and t by 3. So now what will happen is, अगर equal interval में travel कर रहे हैं, then the average speed is arithmetic mean, right? So it will be v1 plus twice v2 v3 upon v2 plus v3 plus twice v2 v3 upon v2 plus v3 upon 3. So this will be v1 plus 4 times v2 v3 divided by v2 plus v3 divided by 3, which is v1 v2 plus v1 v3 plus 4 v2 v3 divided by size of v2 plus v3. Okay, so this is the right answer. क्या गलती की है तूने?
चेक करना पड़ेगा सर, मैं देखता हूँ.
चेक
पता
कर
नहीं
ले,
सर.
बाद में डिस्कस करेंगे अपन, है ना. Okay.
Yes.
So we'll over the class here only and continue the next class. So इस कॉन्सेप्ट को अच्छे से याद कर लो, क्योंकि तुम लोगों को एग्जाम अभी बहुत लेट देना है, 2 साल बाद देना एग्जाम. तो 2 साल बाद अगर एग्जाम दोगे, 1 साल बाद एग्जाम दोगे तो भूल जाओगे इन सब कॉन्सेप्ट्स को. सो कीप ऑन रिवाइजिंग दिस रेगुलरली, बिकॉज आई डोंट वांट टू लूज ऑन इट. कि एक बार पढ़ लिया ना तो समझ में आ गया है, तो ऐसा ना हो कि अपन जब अपन खुद के एग्जाम दे रहे हो ना तब अपन भूल जाए और कुछ हुआ ही नहीं अपना. सो इसको बार बार रिवाइज करते रहो इन लेक्चर्स को, ताकि तुम इसको भूलोगे नहीं. ठीक है. So we'll over the class here only. Bye bye. Good night.
Thank you, sir. Good night.